capacity so that you can hopefully train them on the value of arts education while they're in the education committee. There are 3 of your states, Arizona, Arkansas, and Massachusetts, that won't be having an election, your governor could run for re-election, and North Carolina will not be having an election because they just had one last year. But this is really important when you think about the stakeholder engagement aspects of what you're doing with SP3. A lot of times when I've worked with organizations on policies like this, they think about how they can get their report finished. They think about how they can share it at one hearing or in one meeting with somebody from the governor's office, and they consider it completed. The changing nature of who's in these offices means you're going to have to prepare yourself to give the same message potentially 20 times in 1 year to 20 different people, because they're going to be changing on who's in those roles. It's actually a great opportunity for you. It's a great opportunity for you to start thinking about the success that you've had, sharing the data from those successes with those incoming people, and getting down to what Narek talked about on stakeholder engagement and convenings. How many meetings can you have in your state or area where you can get those incoming new leaders to be a keynote speaker or to be an MC or to be engaged at your meeting? That is one of the best ways to get some of these elected officials to feel like they own a piece of what your success is, and probably to become an ambassador for what you're doing moving forward. I also want to highlight a little bit on ESSA and what we're seeing. I've got some great staff in our K-12 team, and they've read all 17 of the ESSA plans that have already been submitted. We're in the middle of reading all 34 of those that are being reviewed right now. And one of the things we continue to hear back from a lot of different communities is there's nothing about arts in the ESSA plans, or there's nothing about STEM in the ESSA plans, and there's some frustration there. I would urge you to not look at that necessarily as a negative. Many states that we've seen filled out their ESSA plan in some capacity with the goal of making sure that they can obtain federal funds, but they didn't want to put their entire plan of action in the ESSA plan and be held accountable by the federal government, when the Every Student Succeeds Act is really set on giving states empowerment. So I would urge you to work with your chief state school officer and with many of the deputies in your state education agencies to not focus on what's not in or what is in your ESSA plan, but instead to look at what is the goal of that state education agency and what are the goals that they have longer term. The arts scan that we've done and we continue to do, which shows major areas on arts education policies, is a tool for you to use in comparison. Most elected officials look at 5 states, the 4 that geographically surround them, and the 1 state they aspire to be. So figure out how you can go into your state and compare where your neighboring states and the 1 state you think your chief or your governor aspires to be are on education policies in the arts, and it can help you to be some comparisons. The other is to look at a paper that we released, and we've gotten a lot of good traction, which is really called ESSA and What is a Well-Rounded Education. Our website's easy to get to at ecs.org, and it's a giant search engine. Just type in well-rounded in the search engine title there, and it'll pull up that paper. But that paper is really helpful, especially with the turnover in elected officials, to say, what does ESSA mean for you, and how does well-rounded play into this? How does arts, how does STEM, how does civics, how do extracurricular activities play into the education policies that you're going to be pushing? Lastly, I just want to highlight a little bit about the real value of sharing knowledge and figuring out how you can do some of these convenings. Americans for the Arts has been a tremendous partner with us, but finding ways in your state that you can get the right people in to do these kind of convenings, whether it's seeing if Narek or Jeff, it's easy for me to offer them to travel, if Narek or Jeff can come into your state and help do a national presentation on what's happening, so that then you can delve into some brainstorming session with some of your policymakers on what you're going to do, or whether it's working with Jane Best, who's our director of the Arts Education Partnership, or some of our team with the Arts Education Partnership to help. That's what we're here for, and that's really why we've been so supportive of this SP3 project that you've all invested your time in. There's a lot of successes out there, and the more you can find ways to share those successes, both individually and collectively across the policymakers in your state, I think the more we're going to have an opportunity to truly see education transform from an assessment based on English and science and math to really how are we providing our children with the best well-rounded education possible. So it's an honor to be here with all of you, and I know we're going to have some Q&A going back and forth, but welcome to Denver, and look forward to working with all of you today and into the future. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Pam Paulson. I'm actually from Minnesota. However, I went to school here at the University of Colorado, and I did my student teaching here in Denver at North High School, and I had the most wonderful cooperating teacher. Her name was Joan Brown, and I, to this day, remember almost every lesson she taught me, and that was a very, very long time ago. I am from Minnesota, where we have a state agency called the Perpich Center for Arts Education. It's pretty unique in the country. We run a school for 11th and 12th graders that are highly motivated to work in the arts. It's residential, so they live on our campus, and we're also responsible for statewide professional development for arts teachers as well as other teachers that would like to use the arts in their classrooms. And finally, I have been the director of the SP3 program for Minnesota, where we have focused on teacher evaluation, but that is not what Jeff asked me to talk about today. He asked me to wear a different hat, and that is the College Board, where I have served as a trustee for the last 5 years. And before that, I chaired their academic council and their arts academic committee, and also served on the steering committee for the National Task Force for Arts Education. And over the length of time that I've been working with the College Board, it's been a little over 20 years. And it's been a tremendous honor for me to be able to do that. I don't know how much you know about the College Board. I think a lot of people know some parts about it, but it took me a very long time to figure out all the things that go on there. And I have a new colleague, who had heard that I was somehow on this board, and he said, "Which college board?" Meaning which college I was working with. And so I don't know that everybody knows a ton about it, so I thought I would give you a little bit of an overview of what the College Board is. First of all, it's a membership organization, and we take that highly seriously. It's not individuals, so you can't join the College Board by yourself. Your institution has to join. And there are over 6,000 member institutions. It's big, it's really big, because you count all those people from all of those institutions. About 75% of the institutions that are members of the College Board are secondary schools or school systems. And that became a little bit of a worry, since the College Board was started by institutions of higher education in 1900. Didn't become a 501c3 until the 1950s, but it still was highly organized, and the intentions were these colleges to figure out what kind of testing would be most useful to get young people into colleges. About 22% today are institutions of higher education. And then there's this little piece left of a few percent that are nonprofit organizations and organizations that might have similar missions, or at least believe in the College Board mission. And everybody that becomes a member has to agree to the non-discrimination clause that the College Board has. So there's over 6,000 members, and there are over 1,500 staff members. And the College Board has regions around the state, 6 of them, where they run programs out of that region. And the regions are different. It's very interesting. I've been able to hop around and get to many of those regions for different purposes. They each do a forum, a regional forum every year, and I find that they're quite different from each other. And just to give you a sense of size or scale, it's about $1 billion budget per year. You may know the College Board as a testing organization, because it does that a lot. And one of those tests is the SAT. I'm wondering how many of you might have taken the SAT. Raise your hand if you did. Do any of you even remember your scores, for example? I'm not revealing mine. And they also have an enormous program called Advanced Placement. And how many of you may have taken an advanced placement course? See, they were not available when I went to high school, so you are much younger than I am. You may not have heard of these programs, but Springboard and CLEP are two very large programs, and there are some new ones like the AP Capstone program. And I love that program. It's a program that's been launched just a few years ago. I went to Alberta, Canada to visit a couple of those sites, and the idea of it is that students learn how to research before they get to college, which we have learned has been a skill that a lot of higher education institutions feel needs to be improved. And so I visited one very academic, high-achieving high school and one very low-income school, and both of them were doing AP Capstone, and kids were really thriving, so I was very happy to see that. We've kind of, over the last few years, come up with a way to describe the mission by saying that the purpose of the College Board is really to create a path for students to own their future, to create a path. Now, sometimes I say we should be creating paths because there probably isn't just one, but the whole point is to get kids along the way to succeed. And David Coleman became the president and CEO of the College Board about 5 years ago. Things have changed since David got there, but one of the things David's very clear about is assessment is dead unless, and I know it sounds funny coming from the College Board, but unless it is accompanied with opportunity. So when there's opportunity, kids find taking those assessments more valuable. And I want to give you one example in the last five years. The College Board did produce materials to help students prepare for the SAT, but they never had what were called test prep kinds of courses. And there were a lot of places that still do that. But the College Board decided to partner with the Khan Academy. How many of you have ever been on the Khan Academy site? Again, those of you that are, that's great, because what we've done through the College Board is actually get practice tests and materials up on the Khan Academy so that they are free. They're available to every single student anywhere in the world, and they're free. That changes the playing field so that kids that don't have the resources, the income to pay for those test prep courses can now go online anywhere, any place, including their phone, and get help. And it's customized for them based on their PSAT score. So if you take that and you get a score that shows where you've done well and where you need to work, that can get plugged into the Khan Academy electronically. It generates a way for you to figure out what you need to work on. And the kids now that are putting in about 20 hours of study on Khan Academy have shown to improve their SAT scores by 115 points on average. And it's across all demographics: rural, urban, suburban, male, female, race, everything. It's showing that that is an advantage for the students that take part of it. And up to this point, it's pretty new. I'm going to say maybe 4 years that we've been working on this. Over 5 million students have accessed the Khan Academy. And I say this to you because I want you to know how important that idea of access and equity is to the College Board. And it isn't brand new. We just had the annual forum in New York last week, and we gave an award to Lois. She's no longer with us, but her children were there. Lois Dixon Rice, and I discovered that she, along with Claiborne Pell, launched the Pell Grants in 1972. And that has been an advantage for millions of students in our country that have needed that kind of financial assistance. And I don't know, I'm going to bet some of you in this room have probably gotten a Pell Grant, and if not you personally, you have probably helped some of your students get a Pell Grant. And what I found interesting about that was that Lois Dixon Rice in her comments had said something along the lines of the College Board was the only organization at that time that came forward to support this legislation And in part, it was because it was legislation that was directed at individual students. Not a big, massive thing like a testing system, but actually for individual students to receive the aid that they needed. So the other thing that's new in the last 5 years is that we've been able to use those PSAT scores to send them to organizations that give scholarships so that they know who is like on the cusp of needing some help to be able to make a launch and really succeed. And so at this point, there are $180 million available each year to students that come from, that comes out of the system of the PSAT. The College Board is very interested in trying to help level the playing field so that students who might not ordinarily go to college get a chance to do that. And there are tons of barriers that are in the way of students to try to do that. And one of the things that we have discovered is the low-income kids just can't come up with the fees to take the SAT, to take the AP courses. And so the College Board has been spending $100 million a year on fee waivers and discounts to give to kids that need that kind of assistance to take those exams. And the latest issue that the College Board's been talking about is giving unlimited score sends to students that are in the low-income situations so that they can apply to as many colleges as they want to and have their scores sent for free. So that just gives you a sense of the kinds of things that the College Board's been working on. And we know that while the College Board is thriving and doing well, there are a lot of problems in education for kids, and there isn't equal access. So there has been an effort to work more with rural areas, give students in the rural areas more opportunities. Young women have not been accessing STEM like the men have, so an effort there, as well as in areas, students of color, and most especially Native American students. So there are lots of areas of growth, including international. The College Board has, I think I'm right on this number, programs in about 160 different countries. And I've been able to visit China 3 times in the last year to see what it looks like where AP courses are being offered in China. SAT is not really available to many Chinese students because they have the Gaokao, and they're not allowed to take the SAT. But it is, a world is shrinking. There's so much going on that's so interesting across the world. And I'm just so happy to have been involved in this organization that's taking the social issues as well as the academic issues into account.
Thank you to both Pam and Jeremy for your remarks and for kind of setting the scene of the environment that we're in. As a reminder for those who are joining us by live stream, we have more resources available online at americansforthearts.org/SP3, and this entire presentation will be archived and available, so for those taking notes in the room as well, you can revisit the remarks that have been shared. We do have about 20 minutes for some discussion amongst the two of you about some of the big issues that we tackled both in the SP3 program and within the larger environments that we are operating in the education sector in the United States today. So I have one question just to kick us off for both of you. And at Americans for the Arts, when we talk about arts education policy, it's largely grounded in issues of equity and access to arts education. Both of you mentioned this in your remarks. So what do you see as the future for our work as advocates and policy influencers to achieve the larger goals of equitable access to arts education in the particular political or even test-taking circumstances that you mentioned?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities, and as you get into your states, I'd urge you to start looking at what is the timeline for ESSA plans in your states. So once a state's ESSA plan has been approved by the U.S. Department of Education, it goes back to the state education agency, and the next phase that many people don't talk about yet is that there are supposed to be district ESSA plans that are put together, every one of your school districts. And so That in some states is manageable. There's 40 school districts. In some states, there's 600 school districts. But figuring out how you can make those connections and start to show your successes to some of those superintendents and some of those local school boards on the value of getting that into their district ESSA plan will be a really important component that I'd urge you to not let go by without taking some action.
The College Board was one of the major supporters of the development of the National Core Arts Standards. So that was a pretty important contribution that the College Board made. And subsequently, and I always say this in my state, that the art standards are the #1 policy initiative that we need to pay attention to, because it means every student in our state gets expectations to study in the arts, as well as a graduation requirement at the high school level. So I do think that the standards that the College Board helped us with are incredibly important, but we've also been talking about AP. There are certain arts courses available through advanced placement. There's music theory, and there's some visual arts AP courses, as well as art history. But it seems like one of the things that we're aware of, although middle schools can't be members of the College Board, you need to start sooner in order for the access to really be available and students prepared with the knowledge and skills that they need to succeed. So we've made a commitment to start working more with middle schools. And there's a new program that will launch next fall through the College Board called Pre-AP. Now, a lot of districts have Pre-AP already that they made up, and it isn't even part of the College Board. But this will be a Pre-AP program that has been done in, I think, 5 areas: algebra, biology, ELA, visual and performing arts, and history and geography. And it's expected that schools will take this as a package. And so it's another way that we can start to get the arts out in schools across the country, across the world, through these middle school programs that will be developed. We'll launch with 100 schools in the fall, and then by 2020, it'll be a full launch. And again, the arts are in there. So I'm happy to say that there are ways that the College Board's continuing to keep the arts as a means of being accessible broadly.
And that's a great segue, Pam. Particularly, I loved the combination of assessment plus opportunity, particularly around the narrative that has been built around assessment in this country in the past decade or so. So a question for both of you: how do you see that type of pairing with the assessments that are required and the accountability that's required, particularly for the arts in this new era of ESSA, being matched with the opportunities that are offered in many of the other provisions of the bill, particularly around teacher professional development or resourcing for well-rounded education?
Well, I think there's a lot of interesting case studies out there that you can take forward into your state and share as they're trying to figure out what kind of changes are going to be made to the assessment and what could be made to professional development for teachers and curriculum. I talk a lot about a study that the U.S. Department of Ed did, but with one of our arts education partners, the Wolf Trap Foundation. Wolf Trap Foundation put a good amount of money into some early learning programs in some very high poverty neighborhoods outside of DC. I think they're in Maryland. And this was an arts program that they instituted in an early learning classroom setting, and the goal was not to teach arts. The goal was to see if they could increase math scores. And after they did the analysis on this, students who went through that art program in their early learning classroom actually ended up by 3rd grade being 2 grade levels ahead in math scores than those students who didn't. It's taking studies like that and sharing that data, that success, with your superintendents, with your district personnel at the state level, that helps them to rethink, okay, what should we be doing differently? How did they introduce that in early learning? Could we do the same on our 1st grade or 2nd grade or 3rd grade level with the goal of increasing some of our math scores? There are a number of studies like that that show that arts interventions, and including arts in multiple different ways of learning, have brought up some of the test scores that some of that legislation is really aimed at trying to achieve.
I'll have to speak specifically to Minnesota. And we did a lot of listening sessions, the Department of Education did, and arts kept coming up. People everywhere wanted to make sure that there were arts in the ESSA plan, and they are. There's a couple of tiny places where the arts are mentioned, but I think there's the possibility for big impact, especially with the well-rounded. And I think people get it, that they want their children to have the arts, they want that creativity and imagination in their children's education. I feel like our part is to show them how that can look and why that's so successful. And so doing things like Turnaround Arts, we've got 7 Turnaround Art schools in our state. We have schools that are all around the rural part of our state in a project that we call PAINT. It stands for Purpose Arts Integration Network of Teachers. And I think those are visible ways to show people that it's not just little ones that can learn through arts integration. We've got just as many high schools that are doing it, and it's complicated with their schedules. And we know that there are certain things you have to figure out when you're trying to make that a reality in a high school, but we're asking them to co-teach. That's hard to do too, but that's a great model for bringing the arts and other subject areas together. And we've discovered that that means the other teachers are learning about our art standards, and our arts teachers are learning about the other standards, and they're doing a lot of inspiring work for both the students and the teachers. So I think it probably is modeling it and sharing it and videotaping it and getting it out there so that it's real, because if you just say the words, a lot of people just can't imagine what it looks like to include the arts in all sorts of aspects of education.
And Jeff, just to add to that, I mean, the goal in a lot of this legislation, especially with Every Student Succeeds Act and what some states are doing for the assessments, is to guarantee that all children are getting an adequate education so that they're ready to move out into the workforce. We know that you're not going to get your bottom 20% performing students to move just by raising the best of your students' test scores. There actually has to be intervention to make a difference in these students that are having the most difficult time. Using some of the data on things like students who are engaged in an additional activity like music or band or arts are much more likely to stay engaged for all 4 years of high school, which means they're probably much more likely to be able to see some progress in their educational attainment and increase those assessment scores for the state. That's the kind of interventions that you want to be talking about with some of your policymakers, because we can't just try to get the best performing students to do a little bit better on test scores and say our state average went up. Most states, to meet the goals that they have, are going to have interventions that help the lowest performing 20%. And there are multiple success stories across the country and case studies that you can use to show where arts and other activities have been very helpful there.
That's great, and I think that you're both referencing, you know, federal policy and really that manifestation of what Narek had mentioned earlier, of that federal to state to local pipeline. And Pam, this is a question for you, because I noticed that in your bio you pretty much are the realization of the federal state local pipeline, working federally with the College Board, at the state level with the Purpose Center, and then locally with your school. Do you have an example of a program or a kind of case study, if you will, that has been enabled by federal policy, implemented through the state, and seen success in the school?
Well, I don't know if you would call Turnaround Arts one of those federal policies or not, but it clearly has been, from the national level at least, to, we were in the second cohort. They had 8 schools that were involved initially. We came in on that second cohort with 4 schools, and we got state funding to do that. I think the first year we got about $1 million, and then after that, to run that program for a couple of years, it was more like 1.4. And now we've brought that inside of our own agency, so we're not getting that. I mean, we're funded by the state, but this was legacy funds. And so clearly the state has supported it. And then it's in schools, not districts, it's individual schools. But really, when you have a Turnaround Arts school in your district, it becomes pretty much of a local district recognition of the value and the importance and the way that it can work in a local school. So it really does go national, state, and local. And it is working with the lowest 5%, those children that are in the lowest 5% on their test scores. And I'm telling you, every single time I go into one of those Turnaround Art schools, I am astounded at how every staff member is on board. That's one of the requirements. It's every staff member. And so it's every kid and every staff member, and it really takes you down from this major high-level work to this individual child who's sitting in front of you and creating something that they probably would not have done if they didn't have that program at hand.
Well, great. So let's change gears just a little bit. Jeremy, you opened your remarks by talking about the difference between policy and politics and how that can influence what we've been working on in states across the nation. So where do you see some of these larger trends kind of fall on that spectrum? Do we need to be more aware of policy or of politics? Maybe around appropriations, Title I? What are some of those things that we should be looking out for?
Well, I think it's important to get a political lay of the land and to look at things. We do that all the time at the Education Commission of the States because you need to know who you're working with. I don't think that means you have to take one side or the other in the political spectrum, though. I mean, the reality is Republicans have almost 2/3 of the governorships in America right now. Republicans now control about, I think it's 64, 65 of the legislative chambers. It's the first time in America since the Civil War that Republicans control both the House and the Senate chambers in all of the 13 southern states. But that doesn't mean that there aren't really big policies coming out of states. There are a number of them. We've seen more Republican governors putting money into early learning programs than we have Democratic governors over the last couple of years. We've seen a lot more Democratic governors who are focused on some post-secondary policies. So it's important to look at the political lay of the land. The policies, I think, are where you can really look at the bipartisanship that you don't hear about, but it is happening across the country. There's a lot of, I think, policies for what you're working on, especially with SP3, that if you can find a way to get a Democrat and a Republican on the Education Committee or on the Appropriations Committee in your state to embrace things like some of the turnaround arts or some of the integration on the core standards that you're talking about, you will see those policies move rather quickly and probably without the political bluster that we hear about in the news or on Twitter regularly. There are some really, really good individuals, especially in these state houses, who really do want to make a difference. The one thing I'd urge you just to remember is, in 2/3 of our state houses, being a legislator is a secondary job for these people. They have a real job and career in some capacity, and education may not be why they ran for office. They happen to be put on an education committee or put on appropriations committee that's dealing with education issues. So you really do have that opportunity to not only, it's not just informing them, you want to earn their trust and become someone that they call upon when they're trying to figure out what's the best opportunity to make a better outcome for our children.
And we'll hear more about crafting relationships and building allies with elected and appointed officials in the next session. Absolutely.
One of the things that I love to do when I'm at the legislature talking to the members of both House and Senate is find out what their own arts background might be or what their family's arts background might be. And I am always amazed. A lot of people have experiences that they can draw on, and when they're trying to understand, well, what could a program like an arts integration program look like in a school? We have one legislator whose son is in the band called Trampled by Turtles. Do you know that band? And he's like a groupie. He goes and follows his son in this band around. And I happened to be in Sitka, and there was a poster of Trampled by Turtles, and they were coming to this little town in Alaska. And I went around and asked if I could get a copy of that poster to bring back to this legislator because I thought he'd be so tickled with it, and no one would give me the poster because the event hadn't happened yet and they weren't going to give the posters away. But there are so many people that actually have children or have themselves been involved in the arts that can become great allies.
Absolutely, thanks. So this summit kind of is acting as a bit of a pivot point away from us talking internally with our 10-state cohort within the State Policy Pilot Program and looking externally towards sharing that knowledge amongst other states and with other influencers and policymakers. So I want to just get your thoughts on how we talk about the very niche area that is the realm of arts education policy. It can be seen as very wonky or something that only a small number of folks around the country care about. So how do your organizations, Education Commission of the States, Arts Education Partnership, the College Board, the Purpose Center, whichever, how do you share knowledge across the country, across your regions with various constituents, whether they be influencers, policymakers, or even folks like parents or teachers?
Well, the College Board does an annual forum where they bring together people from all aspects of education, and it really is an opportunity to network and talk about issues. And the one that I worked on with SP3 was teacher evaluation. And it was actually Chris, one of our evaluators, that said, you have to get in touch with another state. There are already states that have been funded by Race to the Top funds who've been working on this particular issue for a number of years, and you don't need to start from scratch. And it was pivotal for us. It was absolutely pivotal when Carol Gates from Colorado came to Minnesota and shared with us what they had been working on. It's ultimately what we did, different because we had to put it in our own Minnesota framework, but basically we created what were called look-fors. What would an administrator look for who's not an arts person, doesn't come from experience there? What do they look for in an arts classroom? And we built this for each of the arts areas at each of the grade levels using the domains that our state uses for our state teacher evaluation process. So to me, I am such a believer now in trying to look for those connections across states. AEP does that at your forum, you're convening. And you find that I found that with the A+ schools being in SP3, another North Carolina initiative that influenced what we did with our Turnaround Arts program, with the arts integration piece. It's critical. I look for those connections everywhere I can, and I think the power of convening that was up on Narik's slide is absolutely right. You need to be able to connect with people across the states so you don't start from square one and you can enhance your work.
I think two important things. One is to figure out who your audience really is. I think a lot of time when we believe in something, we try to tell our story, but we aren't really thinking about who is that audience. I mean, think a lot about who is that legislator. Why did that legislator run for office? I use the story a lot about the chair of the Senate Education Committee in Indiana, but Senator Cruz, he's over 60 years of age. His engagement with K-12 schools is with grandchildren, not with his children or not himself. He's an auto auctioneer by trade. So how do you talk in his language? You don't have to auction off whatever you're trying to do, but how do you talk in his language so that he connects? So thinking about who your audience is the number one thing. The second is people get in those roles a lot of people asking for things from them. How do you bring unusual suspects to the table? So if you're going to talk about arts programs that you really want to make sure are funded, maybe don't send a whole bunch of the arts people in. Can you find a CEO of a local business who talks about the need for more creativity in the people they're hiring? Can you find a math teacher who's talking about the inclusion of arts in their math curriculum and the outcomes it has made a difference? Those kind of things make your story different instead of traditional, which is we need help, we need you to fund this, we need you to pass this bill. And in a lot of those cases, for those elected officials, if you give them a unique story of a math teacher using arts in the classroom, or a CEO of a company who needs more creativity in the workforce that they're trying to hire, those elected officials will use your very story in their speeches when they go out around their districts. So think about who your audience is and try to bring unusual voices that they may not suspect to promote what you want.
So my last question is based around a philosophy that we have at Americans for the Arts, where we try to pair national clout with local tools, which is a philosophy that largely informed the design of the state policy pilot program. So how do you feel that your organizations or others that you might have seen throughout our world in arts education help state arts education advocacy leaders with the tools that you might offer or various other opportunities to capitalize on some national clout?
I think the more you can find ways to use a national presence to inform state leaders is key. I mean, we did that at the Education Commission of the States at our national forum we held in San Diego this last year. We were excited to be able to work with Mary Larson and with the San Diego Youth Symphony. And after lunch, when everybody's tired and speakers usually don't get great reception, we had two amazing artists who came and played for us from the San Diego Youth Symphony. And it gave a lot of those state legislators and the governors who were there, and we had more than half of the nation's chief state school officers there, a chance to see the real value of what was being provided in this education. So I think you need to find ways at some of these national organizations you work with to infuse some of your success stories into their curriculum that they're teaching to state legislators and chiefs and governors like that. It's not an easy transition, but believe it or not, most of those national organizations are looking for something other than another dry keynote speech to present at their event. So if you can give them some creative ways to highlight your local successes, it's well worth that opportunity.
In a lot of states, including mine, you sometimes have to be cautious about saying this is coming from the federal government or a national project because they want it focused on their citizens and their needs. That was particularly true when we were working with the standards, discovering that we had to be careful about how we were framing these national core arts standards, because core could be a difficult word, national could be a difficult word, but now Minnesota's in the process of revision of our state standards, and having those national standards, we may not take them lock, stock, and barrel, but we are definitely thankful that those standards exist, primarily for us because we resisted grade by grade standards and went with grade groupings. But now with teacher evaluation, teachers need standards at every grade level because they're being evaluated against their students' success. And so that national initiative has been enormous for states to be able to have very current thinking brought to the table when they're revising their standards, but it's a kind of an iffy thing. And I would say the same thing was true with Turnaround Arts, that there was a question about what is this national program coming in to our state? Don't we already have resources at the Purpose Center that can do this work? So it's a balance between bringing tools in and in some way using them to shape programs that are Minnesota-based programs, for example.
So any additional last thoughts or reflections on everything that we've talked about, or any of the findings from the policy advancement portion of the State Policy Pilot Program?
Well, I want to go back to the College Board for just 1 minute, because I felt like we had a really interesting conversation last week at the forum about the status of mental health for our students. And I am noticing that in our own school. And I sat next to somebody at lunch at the standards writing thing on Monday who runs an art school, and we both commented that there are some new and different and important needs there. And one of the things that we were discussing is a general sense that teachers are stressed out. And I saw a recent study that said they're more stressed out than most other professions, and that students have high anxiety and stress. And an organization like the College Board has a very far reach. And one of the discussions was, should we limit, for example, the number, or should we work with higher education institutions to limit the number of AP courses that kids can report on their applications? Because there's this feeling now they need to take a dozen, and they need to stretch themselves beyond reasonable limits to be able to participate in after-school activities. And what if the College Board said, you can only submit 5? They can take more if they want to, but would that not be a way that something like the College Board message could get out there to say students should focus more deeply in something like their art area and have a deep and profound experience that they can bring to their college application versus this very widespread anxiety-producing thing that's causing us as a nation to have mental health issues. So I just want to bring that kind of thing up because the College Board is trying to figure out where will we have the best impacts to make the most important opportunities for kids available, especially in that transition between your senior year and your freshman year. There's so much work that could be done in that little transition and to help make kids successful in the transition and then ultimately successful in their higher education.
And I just close by saying, I think the real power for arts and for education policy is with the states. No Child Left Behind was a law that was in place for 13 years. My wife and I have 3 children. Our oldest, our son, graduated high school last year. He spent his entire K-12 experience under one federal law, No Child Left Behind. So while we may have changes in administrations and in who's in office, I don't see the Every Student Succeed Act changing soon. The analogy I use is in the same 13 years of No Child Left Behind where we didn't have a federal change, Apple issued 7 different iPhones to keep up with changing technology. So the power is really in the states for the kind of policy changes that you should be looking at and where you can learn from other states. And we think there's going to be a lot of those changes that are going to be coming very fast at the state level over the next 3 to 4 years once ESSA is fully implemented. So take advantage of that opportunity, build those relationships, have those convenings, and see where you can continue to promote a well-rounded education.
Well, I wish to thank you both for joining us this morning. Can we have a round of applause for our 2 guests? And with that, I'll use Pam's language around having a profound experience, as we all have a profound experience over coffee during our 15-minute break. We'll see you back here in 15. Slide that microphone over to the right. Slide that,
yeah, that's
that
fine.
computer. No, slide that one up.
Okay, or my little one can go there. I've got it's a tiny little.
Yeah, it's just, it can't close because then it disconnects from the screen. Does that power cord not reach? Yeah, so then
it's
if you.
fine. I'll just put it right there.
Perfect.
It's a little scroll.
Yeah. Great.
fine. Yeah, that works just fine. And Lucy, if I hand you the clicker. Let
If everybody could return to your seats, we'll get started with the next panel. If everybody could return to your seats, we'll get started with the next panel.
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to our live streamers on the East Coast. My name is Elizabeth Dorman. Please feel free to call me Lizzie. I am the State and Local Government Affairs Manager here at Americans for the Arts, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I got looped in because many of the teams had State Arts Action Network members as part of their teams, and the State Arts Action Network is a professional development network of over 43 state arts advocacy and service organizations. So I got looped in to Team Arts Ed through that program, and then with the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, I've been on board ever since. So it's lovely being here and getting thrown into the world of arts education policy and arts education advocacy. So today, with me on this panel, I have Lana Hallmark with the Arkansas Department of Education, Wendy Lisco with the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, and last but certainly not least, Andrew Bauman with Global Strategy. So as we went through these 3 years all together, providing technical assistance and convening with the 10 state teams, and also just we had conference calls with them, many emails with them, and last but again, certainly not least, all of the case studies reviewing that, disseminating it, and as we were reading them, there was all these common themes. We just went through the policy, and we found 6 core advocacy skills throughout all of 10 state teams that we want to share with you today. So I will be going through all of these in detail, but we found that all of these 6 advocacy skills were needed to provide advocacy infrastructure for successful arts education advocacy. First, sustaining core leadership. Second, forming relationships with coalitions. Third, fostering allies among elected officials. Fourth, building an information base. 5, crafting consistent and effective messaging. And last but not least, again, is creating communication infrastructure for grassroots advocacy. So let's run through these in a little bit more detail. So number 1, sustaining core leadership. We found that efforts with SP3 teams were most successful when they were led by a steering team of arts education stakeholders. These teams were typically small, about 3 to 5 people, and the leadership typically represented the state's education agency, the State Arts Council, and 1 or more advocacy organizations. And again, these teams that kept these 3 to 5 people representing these different perspectives, they achieved the most success when these individuals stayed on the team throughout the whole effort to provide consistency, and also when they were onboarding new members to the leadership team, they were able to provide, knowledge and the history of what the initiative was doing for their SP3 team. And then, of course, they provided diverse perspectives to achieve success with the SP3 initiative. So an example of core leadership, again, all of our teams displayed this, but I had to call out Team Oklahoma here today is Jennifer Allen Barron, and with Oklahoma Arts Council. Also, Amber Sharples with Oklahoma Arts Council, and Julia Kurt, Oklahomans for the Arts, and she's actually running for state senate, so yay, we're very excited and proud about that. Just every time the 3 of them worked very collaboratively throughout the whole 3 years. Also, just from an internal staff standpoint, all 3 of them were on every single call, replied to every single email, just were very in sync and worked together and provided their leadership all together. I also want to give them a shout out. They brought together a task force of 24 different people from throughout the state and from all sorts of arts disciplines to help inform their arts education policy work and advocacy work. And again, they all worked very much in tandem and respected each other's specialties. For the second advocacy skill that I want to talk about, it's forming relationships with coalitions. We found that efforts were most successful when you were engaging with people outside of the typical arts education field, and examples of this are key influencers, business coalitions, foundations, other grassroots groups, charter school representatives, statewide networks for education advocacy like the PTA, or education associations like the State Superintendents Association. I want to call out Team California. I sometimes forgot that they were a coalition because it just seems like they're all the same organization because they're so in sync and they all bring their own unique perspectives to this work. Within their coalition, of course, they have the California Alliance for Arts Education. They have close relationships with the California Department of Education, the California State, the PTA, the California County Superintendents Education Services Association, that's a mouthful. And they all worked in tandem to pursue their Title I policy work. Number 3 is fostering allies among elected officials. We found that success was achieved when all the advocates and just the SP3 teams in general remained very flexible and adaptable as education leadership changed or political leadership changed, and success was also achieved when they stayed on top of relationship building with changing elected officials. Also, policy opportunities for collaboration, such as ASA expanded coalitions, and they were able to reach appointed elected officials, and they also were able to tap into VIPs from other sectors, and also engaging better with legislative leadership. I wanted to call on Team Massachusetts. They also have a really fantastic Arts for All coalition, which includes Arts Learning, Mass Creative, the Boston Public Schools Arts Department, the ESE's Arts Equity Coordinator, Edvestors, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and the Massachusetts Institute for a New Commonwealth. Project Learn and Young Audiences in Massachusetts, big coalition, but all those voices together working in tandem. They developed a Dear Colleague letter for the legislature to call for the inclusion of arts education for the state accountability plan. And they gathered 60 signatures out of 200s from both sides of the aisle, which is a huge accomplishment, and just showed that they really were able to talk to both sides of the aisle and get a lot of support from the state legislator in that effort. Next is building an information base. As you all know, your efforts are most successful when there's some sort of data collection or research to help inform and promote your policy goals. And as advocates, you need to have research about the impact of arts education on student success, and also quality data on what's going on with arts education that you can update easily and regularly. I wanted to call on Minnesota. As part of their project, they hired evaluators to do a statewide survey of teachers. And this was really critical with their work and their TDE, their Teacher Development and Evaluation statute. And from that survey, they were then able to find where teachers needed additional help with this statute, which really informed their Lick4's program. If you want more information, I recommend that you check out Minnesota's case study or chat with Pam Paulson, who's here today. Next is crafting consistent and effective messaging. And again, we found efforts were most successful when leaders acknowledged the need for developing a messaging campaign about the value of arts education. And I wanted to call out Arizona. They created this whole messaging triangle, and what I mean by that is depending on, who they were targeting about training them with arts education messaging, they made a small soundbite message, they made a medium message, and a long message to really keep that in sync and to easily train folks on how they can be better arts education advocates. Last but certainly not least, creating communication advocacy infrastructure for grassroots advocacy. We found that teams were successful when they had the ability to communicate with and mobilize grassroots efforts in a timely fashion. And using software like Voter Voice, it enables groups to mobilize their grassroots and connect them better with their elected officials in terms of advocacy. I wanted to call on Michigan because they actually reached out to individuals and organizations across Michigan to help them prioritize and select final policy recommendation for arts education, and also to empower educators, advocates, all citizens of Michigan to provide input on where they want their priorities to be for arts education. And thanks so much for that quick run through. And now I'm going to turn things over to Lana Hallmark to talk a little bit more in detail of what Team Arkansas was up to.
Thank you. I'm Lana Hallmark. I'm the Fine Arts Program Advisor at the Arkansas Department of Education. I also hold an advisory position on the board of Arkansans for the Arts. Okay, the good, the bad, and the innovative. I would like to say that Arkansas's SP3 work was all good and innovative, but there was some bad too. But SP3 lesson, it's all about lessons learned, I think, and we learn more from the bad. So I'm going to talk about all of it, the good and the bad and the innovative. Also, I really found interesting in the blurb that we got today, the terms agile and responsive. So I also want to address agile and responsive in our work too. First of all, let me review quickly. The SP3 plan, the original Arkansas SP3 plan, which we stuck to all the way through the program, had two important initiatives. Goal 1 was to establish a statewide arts advocacy organization, and Goal 2 was to implement the then newly revised Arkansas Fine Arts academic standards. So Goal 1, establish a statewide arts advocacy organization. Arkansas had never had one. There were no alliances. Even the Department of Ed and the Arts Council, who were both strong organizations, weren't really doing any work together. So this was a very ambitious project from the beginning. It was a very ambitious project. So here's the good at this point. Arkansans for the Arts was founded. It does exist. This happened as a result of the SP3 program. We call it ARFTA. ARFTA's mission, it has a mission, is to advance the arts, arts education, and the creative economy in Arkansas. ARFTA has a mission. It has board members. It has a strategic plan. It has members. It has a website. So a lot's going on with Arkansans for the Arts. They've already done some good advocacy work, as a matter of fact. ARFTA leadership attended the stakeholder meetings that surrounded the planning of Arkansas's ESSA plan, and they got a statement about ESSA and fine arts into public record when ESSA was being written in Arkansas. ARFTA leaders also met with state legislators when a bill was introduced in our state legislature this past legislative session that would have negatively impacted middle school arts education in Arkansas. And that bill was eventually pulled. It didn't even run. And I think it was entirely due to the efforts of our ARFTA leadership. Here's the bad. It takes a really long time for a new nonprofit to get off the ground. And it's not just Arkansans for the Arts. Like they say in the movies, it's a tale as old as time. And 2 years or 3 is not enough. So Arkansans for the Arts is still struggling. And we have all of those new nonprofit pains. We're finding their voice, finding out how to communicate with their audience, figuring out what their capacity needs are, figuring out what their leadership needs are, because frankly, we've been through a couple of executive directors already. But the point is, or at least the point should be made, that this is really the most important work that Arkansans for the Arts can be doing at this moment, is this infrastructure. Without this solid foundation beneath them, well, we all know what's going to happen to an organization that doesn't have a solid foundational infrastructure. It's not going to be sustainable. So, there was really no way in its first year or two that Arkansans for the Arts could take on any kind of big initiative, advocacy initiative on their own. They were really too busy building the plane. And so here's how they were responsive and agile. Because and this brings us to goal 2, which was implementing the state fine arts standards. Obviously, ARFTA was not there yet. They were not going to really be able to push that initiative through. Because the director of the Arts Council, and at the time, and myself from the Department of Education, because we were both on the steering committee, Arkansans for the Arts was able to rely on those 2 more established organizations to fulfill that second goal, to work towards that second goal. It was important, our second goal was, because Arkansas, just through the coincidence of timing, was the first state to revise their state standards after the new National Core Arts Standards were rolled out in 2014. The new national standards rolled out on June 4th, 2014, and coincidentally, my revision committees were scheduled to convene on June 12th. So, and we have a state law in Arkansas that mandates that Arkansas standards have to be written by Arkansas teachers. So we couldn't just adopt the national standards outright, but we did rely on very heavily as a resource and a reference. So, and actually at this point, do you have, oh, can you do this? I'm gonna let Lizzie show you some pictures. So what happened was, the Arkansas Arts Council, the Department of Education, and the brand new Arkansans for the Arts, supported with SP3 funding, created a professional development series that supported the implementation of the new art standards throughout the state. It was kind of innovative in Arkansas. It was innovative in Arkansas. It had never been done that way before. But because it was not just teachers, and they were not just meeting in the educational service cooperatives, we included teaching artists and community artists, and we reached out to community-based arts organizations to host these workshops in inspirational, authentic spaces, and pretty soon they were reaching out to us saying, come to our space and present your workshops. It was hugely successful. And because Arkansans for the Arts had supported the project, been a partner in the project, their story was heard by hundreds of arts educators and community-based artists across the state. So this program got a lot of attention. We were asked to do it again in 2017. We did a new series this summer. The next thing I know, the University of Arkansas, the chairman of the Department of Art at the University of Arkansas is calling me, and they want to be part of this initiative. Okay, here's some more bad news. Unfortunately, Arkansans for the Arts was still kind of lumbering along and not really ready to respond. We didn't have an ask yet. We didn't know what, the university's reaching out to us, but we didn't have anything to say, oh, then let's do this. So a few months later, however, actually almost a year later, fortunately, we got back to the good. ARFTA decided it was time to step out, take on a big project of their own. And so at that point, fortunately, the opportunity wasn't lost. We called the chairman of the art department at the University of Arkansas, and together we partnered to hold regional arts roundtable discussions, convenings, again supported by SP3 funding. We started with 2 in 2 opposite corners of the state where resources are totally different. And they were hosted by University of Arkansas campuses, one in Fayetteville and one in Monticello. And they were very well attended. Their purpose was really to connect not only with arts educators, but with a much broader base of potential partners and stakeholders. Our state commissioner of education attended and was a panelist at one of these meetings. We had a state legislator, a state representative on one of our panels, and a lot of movers and shakers came out, and it was ARFTA's I think, really big success story over the 3 years. This just happened in June, May and June of this year. Okay, so the great thing is, and again, here we see how agile and responsive this is. Those 2 roundtable discussions were so successful that now 2 other campuses in the university system in other regions of the state have reached out and asked to host roundtable discussions after the first of the year on the other side of SP3. And we are planning to have those meetings after the first of the year. Also, you may have read about the wonderful $120 million endowment that the Walton Family Charitable Foundation has just given our new partner, the University of Arkansas Art Department. And the timing of that was just incredible because Jeannie Hewlin, who is the chairman of that department, called to tell me that that gift was going to have a huge impact on K-12 arts education in Arkansas. So here we are at the end of our 3 years in SP3. Is Arkansans for the Arts still kind of clunking along? Yeah. But from Lizzie's list, we still struggle especially with core leadership, sustaining core leadership, and I think with creative and consistent and effective messaging. However, we've had some real success in forming relationships and in fostering alliances with decision makers. And I don't really have a closing for this because I see it as more of a jumping off place than an ending for us in Arkansas because of SP3. And so we appreciate the opportunity very much.
Good morning. I'm Wendy Lisko. I'm the Education Program Director at the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation in New Jersey, and I'm feeling really privileged to have the opportunity to talk about some of the work we've been doing in New Jersey along these indicators that Lizzie talked about. And I think, Narek, you'd be happy. I think I should have, if I had more time, I think I would have created some sort of Venn diagram that showed how these were all overlapping, because they really do overlap. Some were reliant on one thing happening before we could do the other, but most of them were happening parallel. And I'd have to say, you know, I think SP3 was really a funder's dream, because I think funders tend to, as you all know, we're looking for data, and we like issues that are being attacked through partnerships and that are trying to change systems. So this was really a perfect opportunity to really advance some of the work that we've been doing in New Jersey. New Jersey has sort of been at this for about 15 years, many years. You know, there are many iterations of our arts education work. But in about 15 years ago, we started to collect this data to really implement, to be able to address some of the issues we knew in our hearts, we saw with our eyes, but we couldn't really prove. So we started our first arts education census. And during SP3, we revealed our third iteration of it. So every 5 years, we were taking a look back at our baseline. And for us, this really was important for us to really continue the work. And so in this third installment, we found out that 99.4% of students have access to arts education. That means we're short, 26 schools and 9,000 students away from universal access. But through this work, we also realized that access wasn't enough. Participation was different. We have more like 80,000 students who aren't participating. We saw in key measures that of participation and funding and teachers, those indicators were less favorable in schools that had high free and reduced lunch populations. So there were some disparities there. We also saw that, we found out early on that theater and dance were underrepresented. We haven't really moved, maybe 1%. It wasn't enough, so we still have a lot more work to do. And we also saw a little bit of a strange slipping of our nonprofit connections to schools. So data is really great. It sort of tells you where your gaps are, but we still have to do the work now to figure out the why behind it. And that's some of the work that we will be doing, sort of sparked by SP3. And as we all know, data begets more data, so we'll have to be doing more of that. Why is that? So a second element, going back to those 15 years ago, once we had that data, and this is why I bring it up, because I think all the states realized that in order to develop that partnership and to really have the gas in the tank to move it forward, if you have the data, you can bring people together around solving that issue. And so we did create the New Jersey Arts Education Partnership, now called Arts Ed New Jersey, and I'll explain why later. It's part of SP3. And it started under the wing or the fiscal sponsorship of our state arts advocacy, Art Pride New Jersey. Anne Marie is here representing Art Pride, and she's part of our team. So I really just underscore what Lana was saying. Without that coalition, it's really hard to advance this. And I'd say that our coalition right now is mostly education related. At a couple, we're getting some commerce folks onto this committee, but it's mostly officials around education. This also led to summits. I think other people have said that bringing people together, our summits have been really critical in New Jersey. We had one 10 years ago where we had governors and everybody sort of rallying around our first data report, and we've had two summits since we've joined SP3, where we've had past governors come and declare their love of the arts, legislators, and very importantly, we had a whole bunch of panels that had our union reps, leaders, our state school board, our superintendents, our administrators, all be on a panel and literally be on tape and confess their love for arts education and their commitment to advancing it. And it's all on tape. Ready to play back for them at any moment. We also have used our knowledge from our colleagues for Title I work, which will be a topic of another presentation, so I won't go into it, but also we were able to advance some grade weighting, and as you know, as our previous panel talked about, we really worked bipartisan across the aisle and worked with a Republican senator, state senator, Bramlett, to he presented a grade weighting. So now, if you are in an AP art course or any art course, it now counts at the end of your graduation in your score. In the past in New Jersey, it wasn't part of it, so there was no encouragement to take advanced arts courses in New Jersey. Now they count. Major change for us. So I'd say, like, one of the most exciting things I'm so proud to talk about is the campaign that came out of SP3. You know, we all talk about wanting to have a campaign. I think we've been talking about it for 10, 20 years. We've had some arts campaigns, but we did not have an arts ed campaign targeted to that. And so through SP3, we were really able to hire a movement builder. You know, we didn't really focus on somebody who was going to do branding. We found someone, her name is Ennis Carter. Her name sort of says it all. She's with Social Impact Studios. The idea is to build movements that are flexible and responsive and agile. And so I wish I had created more materials on my PowerPoint here, But she was able to take some of the stats that are ours from New Jersey and or across the country and create talking point sheets. We have developed an amazing website that's really flexible. You can build your own campaign toolkit. We had focus groups. And what I've been very excited about is that we've also been able to make it grassroots. We have adapted it through some support from the National Endowment on the Arts to Newark. So engaging Newark citizens and getting a very grassroots campaign, working with teachers in a grassroots campaign. And one of my favorite, I have a lot of favorite parts of this. I get very excited about it. We created this campaign called Yesterday an Art Student, Today A, and then you fill in the blank, or the reverse, Today an Art Student, Tomorrow A. And it was really an opportunity for us to walk up to anybody across, non-educators, farmers, legislators, education people, and just say, think about your arts background. And we all have done that, right? And you take them back, and they're there in the moment, and they write it down, and we've been able to create massive collages with this. We go to conferences across, not just education conferences, we infiltrate and have people doing this signage. And it's been a very effective piece of our campaign. Also through our work with SP3, this was one of our goals, was to do a school board candidate survey. So we have, as it's been mentioned, we have an election in 4 days. And so over the 3 years, we've implemented this survey. At first, we didn't have many school boards tell their arts ed platform, but now you can see all of the school board members who are up for election or re-election are putting their platform for arts, which has allowed us to also, I think this is all about infiltration. I don't know why I have this war mentality around this. But the School Boards Association now is training school boards in arts education and its importance. That's huge for us to be able to move there. And part of that was that our key leader of Arts Education Partnership, Arts Ed Now, Bob Morrison, many of you know him from his census work, joined his school board and was able to get on the school board's board. And then, every meeting, it's like, where's arts? Where's arts? So I encourage everyone, if you have the stomach for it, to join a school board and do that. And the third piece was this public opinion, and this is sort of a segue to our next speaker. We did several public opinion survey polls. And just recently, prior to the election, we found out that 90% of New Jersey residents believe arts education is important for all students, in school, before school, after, and through cultural organizations. Most feel that districts aren't doing enough to support their arts education programs. A significant majority of residents believe the arts help in the development of essential skills such as creativity and imagination. That was 87%. 81% believe it helps with confidence, communication skills, 74%, tolerance of other cultures, 73%, and discipline and perseverance, they were bundled, were 69%. And I think that's very helpful for us to begin to figure out our messaging. What we have not yet done, I know some of the other states in the room have, is sort of test these messages, which ones will relate more to different audiences, and I feel like that is sort of the next step. But I should just sort of end with, that's a perfect segue to you, but I also just want to end with my gratitude for this project and the fact that Americans for the Arts put it together, but also for the generosity of all of the states. I think we've laughed a lot together, we've cried together, we've you know, been stunned at some of the things that have happened to our states, and yet everybody persevered. I guess our grit metric would be 100%. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Bauman. I'm the Senior Vice President at Global Strategy Group, and Wendy did set me up perfectly, so thank you very much. So my firm is a public opinion research and polling firm, and I want to talk today a little bit about how people like me can help people like you win some of the fights that you're trying to fight, you know, to boost arts education and advocacy for that at various levels. So what I do and what my firm does is we do public opinion research for all sorts of things. We do it for political candidates, we do it for foundations, we have some business clients, but we also do it a lot for advocacy organizations, and that's actually what I specialize in. And you know, we get hired by folks in all sorts of spaces, but that are trying to, you know, either pass legislation or get convince a school board to pass something or a regulation or to fight against damaging ones. And we get hired to sort of help with two of the different points that we've been talking about today. And the main one, the one I'm going to spend the most time on, is the consistent and effective messaging. The second is sort of in helping build and manage coalitions. So we use surveys, focus groups, a lot of new online methodology and tools, social media listening. But we basically get hired to really understand what voters' attitudes are about the issues that you care about. And sometimes not only voters, but elites, opinion makers, policymakers. We do research at that level too. And we do the exact kind of message testing that Wendy was just talking about. So a group will come to us and say, well, you know, this bill is before the legislature. We want to help get it passed. How do we convince voters that this is something they should support, or not even support, but, you know, make phone calls to their legislatures to get behind? So we do a lot of work trying to help advocacy groups understand the best way to talk to voters and to elites to boost that kind of support and or activism behind a policy or anything that you're advocating for. The other thing we do that sort of works on the coalition front, and we do this a lot, is we'll do polls that advocacy groups can take to policymakers to show them that their constituents care a lot about an issue, and even more so to show them that they're going to vote on that issue. So I'm actually doing a poll right now for some environmental groups that they want to take to Congress to show some moderate Republican members of Congress that they should not include drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge as part of the tax bill. So we're doing a poll that's, you know, sort of take in their districts, a very fair and balanced poll. I hate using that terminology from Fox News, but, you know, that has a lot of credibility, and we're doing it with a Republican pollster on the side as a partners to boost that credibility, and they're going to take it up to the Hill to policymakers, and the idea is to say, you know, if you vote for this, you're putting your reelection in jeopardy. So it's a little bit more of the stick than the carrot, but, you know, that can be an effective thing. And the other thing we do, I think, as mentioned before, a survey of teachers, we do that kind of survey work as well, you know, to sort of help understand how different constituents, specialized constituents that play an important role in your policymaking, what their attitudes are, and how to sort of bring them to the table, how to talk to them in order to bring that to the table. So it's just all about understanding the various audiences that you may talk to, be it voters, policymakers, constituent groups. You know, people like me can help you sort of understand how to more effectively talk to those folks. So what I'm just going to take a couple minutes to do is to talk a little bit about the best practices from all of our experience and my experience working in this space. I'm going to admit I have not done a ton of research on arts education, but I have some colleagues that have done a lot of work in the education space, a little bit on this, and I've talked to them, and so hopefully I'll bring some of their expertise into this, but I apologize since it's not my area of expertise. But I think that the learning that they have, and that I have just from the advocacy world is pretty relevant to you as well. You know, we just heard that 90% of voters in New Jersey support, you know, think arts education is important, and that's really good. But what's important to note here is that's sort of in the abstract. You know, that's when voters aren't faced with a choice, right? And I think probably a lot of times what you're facing is people like arts education, but when it comes down to it, is the school board or the legislature or whoever going to put their money where their mouth is, or pass a standard and actually make this important? And, you know, when the choice is arts education versus property taxes or versus spending it on something else, then that 90% number can come down quite a bit. So again, what we specialize is in, when you get into those specific fights, how do you convince people that, yeah, it is worth it. It is worth investing in arts education over whatever else people are sort of deciding between. And, a couple best practices in the sort of the messaging is, first of all, decide on the message and stick to it. So this is about consistent and effective messaging. That is really important, and I think is something that's the advocacy groups often, it's very simple, but is often overlooked. You'll think that you have 5 or 6 different talking points that you want to get across, and you want to try to sort of make all of them to everybody. Don't do that. Get your best 1 or 2, and just hammer that over and over and over again. It makes your message, you get bored of it, but the people you're talking to, it actually breaks through all the clutter in their lives, and that's just a sort of fundamental messaging point that's really good. The question is, how do you figure out what that message is? And so obviously that's where someone like me could come into play. Hearing what I think Arizona has done with their message triangle, I'm assumed is something, they use someone like us. If you can't do that, you can't afford that, you don't have the resources, then, steal that from Arizona, from other folks that have done it. Better to do it in your own place, because Arizona is different than New Jersey, than Michigan. But, use what's out there. Use, because don't just, you got to go off your gut. I'm sure your gut is good, but there's data out there, and use that as you can. And the other thing that seems so simple, but so many people, particularly on the progressive side of the aisle, my clients, a lot of them, always forget, is when you're talking to voters, always bring it back to them. It's not about you, it's about them and their lives. And so you need to talk about messages and use messages that are relevant to them and their everyday concerns. Can't be abstract, can't be big. And so when it comes to education, it's all about what's best for the student, okay? When it comes to arts education or anything else, it's about how does my kid get the most benefit out of them going to school, right? And so, when I think about arts education, I think about some of the things that actually the messaging that you were just talking about in terms of, Wendy, in terms of today's art student, tomorrow's whatever. So the idea that arts education is essential to building a well-rounded kid and a creative thinker. That's something that I think all parents want. It's not about turning your kid into the next, Monet. It's about giving them the tools they need to succeed in college and beyond. Or maybe it's about how arts education boosts learning in other things. It's like if you take music, you're going to be better at math. People who have arts education have better graduation rates, that kind of thing. So, sort of have to bring it back to why this is important for your kid. And the other thing that's really important here is to sort of understand who your target is when it comes to voters. So if you're trying to influence a school board in Jefferson County here in Colorado, your probably most important voter is an independent white mom, right? Who's going to vote in a school board general election. But in Denver, a much more liberal place, you're talking to people that have very different priorities sometimes. And so you have to sort of speak to them and what matters to them. And so, for instance, an example of maybe what not to do, when you're talking to that white suburban mom in Jefferson County, I think we all, everybody in a survey would say that it's important for there to be equal access to arts education and for lower income kids and families to have access to that. And I think we all agree that that's important. That suburban mom is never going to vote on that. Telling her that that's the reason to support, a bill for arts education, you're going to lose her. She's got a million things to think about. She may agree with that, but when push comes to shove, if somebody else is saying, this is going to cost money, that it's going to raise your taxes, or it's going to take funding away from something else that your kids needs, that argument is going to just blow right by her. You got to keep it to what matters to her and to her kid. So that's basically the few 4 or 5 best practices points that I've got, and thank you for having me.
Okay, let's chat, shall we? So I have invited my other panelists. I have some questions for each speaker, but of course, if you have questions for each other, this is a dialogue, and I just think it makes a more fun conversation, and in my opinion, not biased, it's a very fun topic about advocacy. So I'm sure you've noticed that, on this panel, there's a funder, and there's a Department of Ed staff. So let's address the elephant in the room. Why advocacy? Why are you engaged with advocacy? How can we kind of take away that fear with other funders and other departments of ed and engaging more with advocacy? And then, Andrew, if you want to put in a why advocacy for you, that would be great as well. Whoever wants to go first.
As a state employee, advocacy is a really sort of area that we have to tiptoe around. It's true. But as you said, when you think about everything in terms of the student, what's good for the student, that makes advocacy, I think, a little easier to swallow for the people that I work with. So, because that's our mantra at the Department of Ed. It's all about the student. So.
Yeah, and in terms of foundation work, I'm sure everyone realizes we're very nervous around that word. And so why am I on this panel? No, I think it's more about, I think we approach it more as educating the public. And we are not advocating, we are funding organizations that advance the ideas around the power of arts education. And we are trying to impact systems. I mean, so many foundations are trying to impact systems, so it's totally within our guidelines. And quite frankly, most nonprofits and foundations have a lot of room, more room than they're actually taking in that advocacy world. So I don't see messaging or education as something that we can be involved in.
And well, the reason I'm in this room is because my buddy Narek and I worked on Howard Dean's presidential campaign way back in 2003 and 2004. So I was a young, idealistic, progressive wanting to change the world. And now I'm a little bit of an older, idealistic, progressive,
Okay, good.
trying to change the world a little bit. And so it took a while, but I found a job in polling that pays me to sort of work on this and try to affect change in areas that matter to me. So it worked out.
It's wonderful. I love how you all touched on that advocacy as a spectrum. I love that. And Andrew, not to put you on the spot again, I think you briefly mentioned it, but I find with public opinion polling, when you go talk to both sides of the aisle with an elected official, they say, who are you polling exactly? Where are these numbers coming from? How can we be sure that this is nonpartisan or bipartisan, whatever language you prefer using?
And so we do all kinds of research, but the research we usually take to elected officials, we survey voters, either registered voters or generally voters that are likely to vote in the next election that matters to them. And so this is a little technical, but the way we do that is their voter files that I think probably a lot of you know, so it's very easy to use that to sort of project who's going to vote. But what's really important, I think, you brought this up, is credibility. It's very easy to write a poll to get the results that you want. But the public leaders and advocates are very, they understand. I'm losing the word. They see through that really quickly if you do that. So it's really important to craft a poll that uses the language the other side uses, that doesn't use biased questioning, et cetera. And I'm a Democratic pollster, so certainly if we're talking to a bipartisan group, we almost always get a Republican partner so that we come that together, because we wouldn't really get through the door without that.
No, that's a really good point. This question's for Lana, because, and she touched on this a little bit, but Arkansas, with its SP3 plan at first, had two very distinct goals, one with the professional development workshops, and then the other creating Arkansans for the arts. When did you find that they started to merge and become one?
That's a really good question, because I spent a lot of time and thinking space at the beginning of this project trying to figure out how those two things synced. As a matter of fact, those of you who have been coming to SP3 meetings know that from the beginning, my colleague Craig and I would actually do dual reports, because he was working on the Arkansans for the Arts project, and I was working on the goals implementation project. And it was really a struggle, it really was. And I think it was finally, when we finally got to those regional meetings, the agenda for the day included two panels, and one panel was basically about arts education, and the other panel was basically a broader base, people interested in the economy and business people and whatnot. And we really worked to make it all one meeting and not two separate meetings in those panels. And I think that was when it finally it finally came together at those regional meetings. And I think I mentioned this yesterday when I was working on my notes. It was so hard for me at the beginning, and yet when I made these notes for this presentation today, it was difficult for me to tease them apart now, now that it's all worked together.
That's wonderful. I did want to pause. Do any of you have a question for each other before I keep plugging away? Keep going? Okay. So I did, in my opinion, you just have more, it's very successful when there is a broad cross-sector coalition. So in terms of establishing your own coalitions, one, can you talk about how you brought on a new partner? Or two, who's a dream partner that you would love to add on to your coalition with your ongoing work in arts education advocacy?
I'm not sure if I'm going to answer this exactly head on, but I do think that as you bring on partners, it goes beyond an invitation. You know, we always forget to find ways to get people to buy into what we believe in, right? We always just invite them and think that that's enough, and then we tell them all the great things about what we do. Instead of finding ways that they can be a part of the design of the plan, they can be part of figuring out what do the standards look like, because those who do the work do the learning. And I think that you have to design for mechanisms to do those kinds of things where you build something together. And I think for us, one of the dream partners, although they don't necessarily show up to our meetings, has been the New Jersey DOE, the commissioner, making sure that we have the commissioner on board, that we honor her. We've honored commissioners at our governor's awards because they actually have made a commitment. And then I'd say the other person at the DOE that's been really invaluable to us, besides our arts representative there, has been our data person. And our leaders have got their buy-in. We didn't ask permission, but they were part of the design. So we got to the place where, you know, it was their idea to include it in the report card. Those were valuable things. And I think that's the nuance that you have to, you know, the different way to ride that wave.
Awesome. Andrew, do you have any?
I don't think this is really my area of expertise, so.
Okay. It's
fine. My answer may be indirect as well. I think the perfect partner is sometimes different in different situations. I've been really pleased with, again, I'm going to go back to the regional roundtable discussions that we had, the fact that Arkansans for the Arts, the whole concept was to work regionally. And so the first roundtable was in Southeast Arkansas. It was that's the Delta. There are no arts organizations. I mean, I had to look hard to find an arts council to even, you know, talk to. So the theme of that meeting was meet the resources, and we brought in speakers from the Delta Regional Authority and grant makers and so forth. And then we went to Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas, where there's Crystal Bridges and the University of Arkansas, and you know, there's a gallery on every corner. Their needs were how to take the wonderful resources that are everywhere and protect them, preserve them. And I'm really excited because our next one coming up after the first of the year is going to be in Central Arkansas in Little Rock. And Little Rock is experiencing a sort of a problem with crime right now. I mean, it's a little bit scary. And so the theme of that meeting is really going to be how to use the arts and arts education to unify the city, how to work through the arts to bring some unity to the city. So that's going to take a completely different kind of partner. I mean, we're looking at talking to the police department and so forth, you know, as participants in that conversation and that work. So, so I think that the issue of the day may determine who the perfect partner is.
Can I add another thing? because I looked across the room and realized for us, you know, on our team, we had a couple people. We had the representation from the Education Law Center, whose primary mission is equity for every New Jersey student. And, you know, they really don't think often, they have an event around arts education, interestingly, but they don't talk about it in any of their briefings, et cetera. But so we brought them on board on our committee, which I think was really smart, because now they are sort of thinking more deeply about what that looks like and how arts can be an equalizer. And they're also really good with the data that we need. And then the other person is, I think we brought on Mary Reese, who was with the Foundation for Educational Administration, because not only because she's a brilliant woman, but that kind of relationship has been really helpful to us, because Mary is the person, and her team are the people, they're the ones training principals, administrators, and superintendents. They're the ones who, if they hold a conference and then have a section about the arts, people will attend it and believe in it. So that has been a real linchpin for our movement. And when the Arts Education Partnership, now the Arts Ed New Jersey, got their own 501c3 just 2 years ago now. It's very new. We didn't start there, which was, I think, helpful. But Mary and Marie are some of the first board members. So they have a long history with it, and they have a sensibility of how to take it to the next stage of its life cycle.
That's wonderful. And I just wanted to pivot. Andrew, I wanted to go back to talking when you speak with voters, being at their level. Could you give us an example? Because I think vocabulary is such a key thing with, reaching across different audiences. Could you give us an example of just the type of vocabulary, or a different word can mean a different thing to a voter than what you are thinking it means?
Yeah, and that's, I think, something that happens a lot with wonky folks, which I am also, and who I work with a lot, particularly at the sort of congressional legislative level. You hear people talking a lot about, well, particularly in, like, say, a political campaign. You might hear somebody trying to sort of tout themselves to voters, and so they want to write an ad that said, well, when this bad bill got forwarded, I voted for the motion to reconsider, or they use just very technical, wonky terms about what happened up on the Hill, and it's just like, no, you opposed it, you voted to stop it, and that can go towards any sort of advocacy level education. If we're trying to pass something that's very complicated, or even not that complicated in terms of a program or whatnot, you don't want to dumb it down. Voters are not idiots. They're smart, but they're not rocket scientists. And the amount of time that they have to think about your issue in a day is very, very small. So you have to simplify it, make it easy to understand, and make it short. And that's the other thing. Like, they don't have, you can't spend 3 paragraphs explaining why your program or your bill or whatever is good. It's got to be 2 sentences, and it's got to be straight to the point.
Wonderful. And I wanted to now talk about just kind of the logistics, the nitty-gritty of working in a coalition, and for Andrew, when you're working with a Republican firm, like, who's on first? Who takes ownership for what part of the portfolio? And how do you all how do you make sure that all of the players in the coalition are on the same page? If you could just talk a couple points about how you stay organized as a coalition for your greater good. Oh,
sure. And I mean, a better example, actually, is I can tell you a little bit about a poll I'm working on right now here in the state for a bunch of environmental groups. I think there are about 14 different groups at the table, between state groups and national groups. It's a challenge because, and I'm sure this is something that you guys face when you're building your own coalitions, but they all sort of have the same end goal, but they've all got their tangential goals, and there are other things that they think and this, that, and it requires huge organization. I mean, when we're working right now on drafting a survey, so I think we've gone through 6 different drafts now, and it just requires us to sort of keep this very updated document, and we get 15 different emails from different people every day with different edits to it, making sure that we know this person wants this and that person wants this, and so in the end we have to sort of be the arbiter and the decision maker and say, we're we're going with this because we think that's going to be the strongest message kind of thing. But it just takes a lot of organization and a lot of patience to deal with that. When it comes to working with a Republican firm, that's actually usually pretty simple. Generally, either we'll take the lead or they'll take the lead. We'll draft the survey and they'll review it. Then when we go to the Hill, we just sort of tag team it. They talk to the Republicans, we talk to the Democrats, kind of thing.
Sure. Wendy or Lana?
Nothing to add.
How about how you guys keep your coalition in line, who takes lead on which projects, how you stay organized as a coalition?
So are you speaking to the SP3 coalition or just
Could be,
our
I mean, I was
partnership?
thinking of SP3, but honestly, if you want to use another example, I think sometimes that's the questions that Americans for the Arts we get is like, how do you keep so many players, all the cooks in the kitchen, towards the same goal to make the same recipe?
Yeah, it is. I think for us, it's been helpful to have the campaign, but we've noticed that, so for example, there are all kinds of partners in this work that don't always get to be part of the conversation or in the umbrella. So we have, need to think about, for example, teaching artists. They are the actual people who are working with our children often, and sometimes we forget to have them included in this conversation. So that is, for example, one thing that we've been working on. And I'd also say that when there are ideas that are trying to be advanced, I don't know about you, but if in our state, we often have the conversation around arts for art's sake, art skill-based versus, serving all the other masters, right? It's a constant conversation, and I think it's fabulous because if you don't have that conversation front and center, it's sort of people's fears get fed and fueled. And so for a big example, for us in New Jersey has been our work around arts integration. So now that is a real trigger word for a lot of people because that immediate tension comes up. And so the way we did this was we actually brought people together to have conversations around what it meant. We collectively did the research, what other people across the country have been doing, came up with a shared definition and shared ideas around how to achieve it. And if you're going to call it arts integration versus arts enhancement or whatever, we're all talking on the same page. And that's again where we brought in the teaching artists because we realized we got all the administrators, not all the administrators, there are a lot of them, but we've got people involved in that conversation and they were getting it, the light bulbs were going off, but the people again who were in schools delivering it, we had forgotten to have that conversation with them. And and again, give ourselves a break, we were just figuring it out, so the next phase was that. And so we've done long processes where we use observation, instead of telling them what it is, we sent them out into the field to start observing and, examples to say what is a best practice. And they're gonna decide what it is, not us. And I think, again, we're gonna have a much stronger alliance and coalition for it. It's crazy making. I wasn't gray before, but it's fun. We also did the same thing with our collective impact survey tools. We did not decide what we were going to measure. We let the people who are on the ground decide. And I'm sure we haven't. The next challenge becomes is that it's not the 10,000 teaching artists we have in our state. It was a handful, but now we have to sort of keep teaching over and over again and keep expanding that circle. So that's the fun work, is expanding the circle and creating perhaps master teachers who will be the voice and they will share it with their satellites.
Great. I have one more question for all of our panelists who've been wonderful today. And again, this is just featuring 2 teams specifically. There's 8 more teams that have so much advice to share that have done wonderful work, and they're in this room, so I invite you to chat with them over lunch, which will be starting right at noon. But last question, because now the SP3 portion, so to speak, is now coming to an end with the 10 states, and now the next stage is sharing it out with the rest of the country. So we're going to have some folks in other states that this is going to be, they're about to embark on something completely new, a new arts education initiative, and they'll be coming to you and say, what's your one piece of advice that you can give me as I embark on this project? And then for Andrew, just if you can, any advice that you have for just the greater, being involved with the political space polling. Lana, it's okay if I put you on the spot first?
I really like those agile and responsive words. to be open to opportunity and aware of what's going on around you and open to opportunity and responding to it when you can.
I guess one thing, Wendy, that I was thinking when you were just talking about the coalitions and arts integration efforts is something I've run into a lot with a lot of my progressive clients in various spaces, is especially where there's big coalitions, is especially some folks that are sort of further on the left, which I am myself. Sometimes they prefer to lose a fight their way than to win. And as someone that gets hired to try to help some people win their fights, that frustrates me. So an example of this, and Eric and I were talking about this the other day, I do a lot of work in the voting rights space, and as a progressive that cares about this, I know that voter fraud is not a big deal. I know that voter suppression is, and I want to change those things. But voters don't think that way. They think that voter fraud is a problem, and when you start talking about voter suppression, they think you have a political agenda, and they turn you out. So if you want to pass voting rights enhancements, you need to meet them on their terms. You need to talk about how your enhancement is actually going to improve security of elections, or it's going to do this or that. But we have members of the coalition that don't want to talk about that. They think that gets into the other side's frames, or we need to be talking about how there's, over the suppression of minority groups, which is all true. But again, when you bring it back to that suburban mom, she's not going to vote because minority groups get suppressed, which is sad. So I think that that's my last point of advice is, if you're working hard to get something passed, to get something implemented, fight the fight to win. Don't lose the fight that you want to fight.
Well, that's a good reminder. Don't worry about being right versus effective.
Sadly, yes.
Right. So I guess for me, you triggered a couple things both of you did. One is just to embrace the naysayers, bring them onto the coalition, versus just trying to figure out ways to deal with them. But if they're with you, you'll figure out, it'll improve the work. I would also, I started with it really. I think it's about getting data and then getting the coalition of the willing, et cetera. But for me, it's really like you just got to start, because if you think about what the work ahead, you're not going to do it. It's, it's a lot. So just start somewhere, and there will be other people who will pick up other balls for you and with you. So just do it.
That's so great. Can you join me in thanking our wonderful panel today?
Thank you, everybody. We've made it through the morning. I know that you will all be agile and responsive when I tell you that lunch is outside here. Well, served outside and eaten in here. We'll reconvene for the breakout sessions at 1:15. And there are two rooms, Brooks and Hamilton rooms, if you're attending one of those breakouts. Those are back down into the lobby past the registration desk, and there are signs there saying where they are. And then the Oxford room is down the stairs right here. Coffee and snacks will be served at the 2:30 break right outside here as well. So thank you, everybody, for the morning session.